This video presentation of the 2015 Public-Private Partnership Summit is brought to you by Barnes & Thornburg, LLP. With more than 600 attorneys and other legal professionals in 12 offices around the United States, Barnes & Thornburg is one of the largest law firms in the country, serving businesses, local governments, developers, and lenders. Our attorneys help bring projects to life. Advising on public finance, infrastructure financing, public-private partnerships, and general municipal law.
All right. I'm Cinda Cully, and I am the Executive Director of the Hendricks County Economic Development Partnership, which is a 3P in itself.
Kurt Fullbeck, I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives with Mayor Ballard.
Matt Skelton, I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Westfield.
Scott Fadness, Mayor of Fishers.
Okay. Kurt Grable, partner at Barnes & Thornburg. The way we'll proceed here is I'll ask you guys some questions, we'll start the discussion, and that given this turnout at 8:35, we will stop, so don't take my interruption as rudeness, and then open it up for questions from the audience here, because I think given the status of the stature of these panelists, they're going to have lots of questions for you. So I'll go ahead and begin. And I'll start with you, Mayor Fadness. When a developer comes to the city of Fisher and knocks on the door with a proposed project, what criteria do you consider? And I recall in one of our preliminary conversations that you mentioned an accurate pro forma, like there's been some homework done.
Yeah, so traditional economic development, when we're talking about jobs and corporate relocations, tends to be a bit more of a poker match, frankly, where we talk about I'm bringing 500 jobs and I'm competing with 3 other communities. When we're talking about real estate development, it's a little bit different in terms of level of sophistication and what we expect. So if your development meets the vision of where we want to take our community, the level of sophistication around pro formas that need to be provided to show us what the actual gap analysis is for you to reach a reasonable amount of profit is significantly different than a typical, hey, I've got 500 jobs that I can bring to your community. And I think sometimes I've seen developers stumble when they come into City Hall thinking it's the same conversation as a corporate build-to-suit. It really is a very different animal when we're talking about just a straight-up real estate development play.
Okay. Mayor Brainerd, what are some of the criteria that the city of Carmel considers when that developer comes knocking on the city's door?
Well, in our redevelopment projects, we certainly look at whether they meet the plan requirements. We look at the revenues very carefully. I think a lot of times, the public and the media sometimes focus on the debt associated with the redevelopment project and forget about looking at the revenues. So we do a fairly detailed analysis, not just of the revenues that are coming, but of the expenses that are associated with that development. Often make comparisons or rather contrast to greenfield development as well. If we're doing it in an area that already has a fire station that's staffed at $2.5 million a year, or an area that already has $1 million worth of police resources dedicated to it on a yearly basis, that's certainly an advantage over an area that's going to require those new services. A lot of people don't realize that, converting a county road in a greenfield area to a city streets between $6 and $7 million a mile, and so we're looking very hard at what's the service load going to be from a new development. Does it make sense for the taxpayer at the end of the day?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Matt, I'll turn to you and ask that when a developer comes to the city of Westfield, what do you think the developer ought to be aware of as to the kinds of political pressures that the city has to consider that would help and facilitate at least the commencement of the project?
Well, I will tell you, I'm going to reiterate a couple of things that,
Sure.
that Jim and Scott mentioned. If a developer comes forward, and you tell me if I answer your question here, but if a developer comes forward and has done their homework and has critically evaluated what the city's plans are. Sometimes they're formal and sometimes they're less formal, but the more consistent your proposal is, with those plans and visions, which, believe me, takes a lot of work to get through that process, depending on how committed the community is to that process. In Westfield, we're pretty committed to that process. It takes a lot of work, and to the extent that your project is consistent with those plans, you're going to find a much more receptive municipality. And part of the reason is because the political part has already kind of been addressed. The political pressure has kind of been addressed already preemptively, and then you're just trying to fit into fit into the plan. And so I think if you're cognizant of those plans and keenly aware of, have already thought about, if you are departing from those plans or you don't neatly fit into those plans, having a developed rationale for why, I mean, that's something that you can do to prepare too. But that helps us.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. I'll turn to you, Kurt. Being in the city of Indianapolis and generally having older infrastructure, what kinds of things, how do you react to developers that come to the city with proposals? And I know you had mentioned in our preliminary discussions, brownfield remediation is something that you consider very highly as being positive.
Yeah, I mean, generally when a developer is proposing a project, the thing that we have to internally ask ourselves is this project transformational? And if it's transformational for an area, then it sort of meets that first step criteria for us. The second would be what they're actually asking for. Is it TIF dollars? Is it a property tax abatement? What are the components of the project? And then thirdly, is there a return on investment for the city? So we can't just do a project and try and break even. But part of that transformational piece, to the point that you were making, Kurt, is brownfield remediation or reuse of a existing building. And two examples would be the consolidated building, which has been an eyesore in the downtown area for years. And I saw Asif Bidet is here, who worked on that project, and Joe Whitsett. They've done a great job in terms of transforming that building, and then the Illinois building, working on that and transforming that project into something that can be productive to the downtown area.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Turn to you, Cinda, as the executive director of the Hendricks County Economic Development Partnership. What role do you play in connection with having developers and the towns of Hendricks County sort of meet up? So could you describe that role and what you do?
What makes us unique, and not just in Hendricks County, but in the roles of economic development offices across the state, is that we can bring together the developers, the firms that are needed to make those pieces of information on the development. What is the return on investment? Running that cost analysis, bringing in the team, the private team that can help the community, and the public officials, in our case, town managers, to make those decisions about what partnerships we need to put together to make a project work. Because one of the things about each and every project that we all work on a daily basis, they're all different. They're all unique. They all have their challenges associated with them, and it's a puzzle. And putting those pieces together and bringing the right people to the table to help solve those, answer the questions, solve the issues that might be coming up with that. And so we can serve that role of taking it from the conception of an idea to that facility being brought together and being built.
Yeah. Cinda, do the developers come to you first, or do the towns go to you and say, this is what we're trying to sell, go out and find that type of company or developer?
Yes and yes.
Okay. Okay.
We handle all of that, and on top of that, we work with our existing industry and companies to help them grow as well. I mean, anyone in my field, in our business, we know that the majority of the growth in our communities are going to come from our existing companies and that existing private industry. And so it's key for us to have that relationship, as well as the community to have that relationship, so that that company can walk into the mayor's office or the town hall or to our office and start that project and that conversation from the beginning. So it's it's key for us to work with our local companies on a 2- and 3-year plan as well so that we can be better prepared for their growth.
Okay. Thank you, Cinda. Mayor Fadness, you had mentioned in our preliminary conversations that one of the difficulties for the leadership of a community is just to sell the complexity of these transactions and how to break it down into sort of a simplistic rationale that your constituents can buy and that ultimately can lead to a project that is politically palatable for the community. You want to describe a little bit of that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the probably the most difficult political obstacles that you find for these economic development deals, and that is the concepts for the incentive are relatively simple, but the mechanisms for which those incentives are carried out are extremely complex. And so when you try to convey to the public the various redevelopment commission, economic development commission, city council, transfer of land, lease of land to the redevelopment authority, when you try to explain all that to the residents, they immediately think that you're trying to somehow make this so obscure and so complex that you're trying to do something behind the scenes, when in reality all you're really trying to do is comply with the various state laws associated with economic development. And so trying to explain that to the average resident when you've spent countless hours with your bond attorneys trying to figure this out, it can be a real challenge. And so you really need to focus on, what are the benefits, what are the costs, what are the risks to the residents, and try to, the best of your ability, to explain the myriad of hoops that you have to jump through in order to get it done.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt, I'll turn to you. In our preliminary discussions on this topic, you talked about just how much of a learning curve you go through on each one of these projects, and how sometimes you're asking the developer to come up with some of those ideas. And I know that one of our panelists that follow, Scott, as a developer, made the comment, look, we look at it like this. This is the profit that we need to make. Now let's just do reverse engineering to get to that point. So you want to comment to that, Matt?
Well, I would second what Scott said. I mean, one of the things that you have to be committed to on our side of the fence when you're going to engage in these complex deal structures, there's got to be some time built in there to educate people, because without fail, you can rely on the newspaper to report the ugliest wart on the apple, and that's all there is for most people. And really, that's probably, if like always a worst case scenario you get to read about in the paper, but all the other 99 options that are more likely are really healthy, and actually we all depend on it for our livelihoods. So those are the kinds of, you have to build in education time. Public relations is key, but a lot of one-on-one with key leadership in your community is key. And I think one of the things we talked about was with our school corporation, we have spent a lot of time, that's kind of ironic, educating the school system, but working with the schools to help them understand how tax increment financing works, just as an example, how it works, what would happen if we don't use it, and develop really a collaborative plan on how to use it and how to address revenue issues within our community. I think we've done a really good job in recent years, and it's only going to get better. We have a stronger, strengthening relationship with our school system, and I think that's kind of key on that front.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kurt.
And I mean, when you boil these projects down to their basic, as everybody in this room is probably aware, it's all about an allocation of risk. And so when the media is reporting about these, they're reporting about the risk that a municipality is accepting. But in order to get these deals done, there's inherently risk that has to be absorbed by a municipality in order to get these projects done to be transformational and to push a city forward. So, when the reporting and the education of the public is key in terms of explaining why a policy was executed, or why a city or municipality is absorbing a certain amount of risk in order to push a project forward. And and painting that into a larger picture is key. So, a municipality absolutely needs the help of the developer in order to do that, because a developer has chosen to put money into an area, and what you have to explain to people is why they've chosen to put that money into that area, and what they need in order to get the return. So, and in a lot of cases, it's not just profit. Profit does drive it, but it's also wanting to be part of something in an area that can help transform it.
Yeah, Mayor Brainerd, thank you, Kurt. In our preliminary conversation, you had mentioned how over the years, you're in your 5th term, you have a long history of redevelopment commission and authority work, TIF projects, that you had gotten Carmel Clay Schools to buy in to this loss of the tax revenue that they're suffering, or at least on the surface. How did you get them to get on board?
I wouldn't phrase it quite like that. And I want to take credit for it, because quite honestly, we're fortunate. We had a business manager at the school and a school board, quite honestly, that I think understood that these projects were good for the community as a whole, and therefore good for the school system from the very beginning. We never had very much work to do with the schools. They got it from the very beginning, and I don't see that everywhere in the state. I think we're very fortunate in Carmel to have people that do understand it. I think it's important, especially with the restructuring that went on at the state in terms of property tax a few years ago, that there's limited impact to the schools now under TIF, extremely limited impact, and it's always important to go and show those 5, 10, 15-year projections to anybody that's willing to listen now. You get really lucky, maybe the newspaper would print it someday, and somebody would actually read it. But to show the huge impact that partnerships with the private sector allow, huge strides from a revenue standpoint, redevelopment standpoint. If you make that analysis of looking at the greenfield cost versus a redevelopment cost, it's huge. The lines converge and the redevelopment goes off towards the sky, within a few months generally, in terms of revenue versus expense compared to the greenfield site. And we really need to do more fiscal analysis. I think it'll help us explain to the public why these projects make so much sense.
Mayor Brainerd, would you just comment on how you sell these projects to your constituents and the other stakeholders in the community? What's been successful for you, and what should a developer know in that regard?
Well, I think the first thing we usually say when we're having a conversation with a stakeholder or anyone in the community is to point out that sometimes it's said that these transactions aren't particularly transparent. Point out that no, they're very transparent. It's just they're tough, they're complicated, and sometimes people interpret that as a lack of transparency. But in reality, they're just complicated. I think a discussion about the allocation of risk to be able to get the developer comfortable with investing in one thing I point out is that there's only so much investment capital in central Indiana, and it's up to us as leadership of the municipalities to work with the development community to encourage that investment capital to go to a place that's best for our cities and towns, and that there's costs associated with all those decisions, and try to explain to them the overall strategy, why redevelopment's important. You have that conversation. Of course, everyone's different. They're looking for different things. Some people are always focused on the risk to the municipality, while others are focused on the risk of not doing something to the municipality. So it depends, but I usually go the route of the fiscal analysis. I think the average stakeholder or layperson is going to see the results very quickly. That's fairly obvious. The questions usually are fiscal in nature.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Cinda, in your experience, what mistakes have you seen developers make, or what has been a few of the causes where you initially thought that there was a very viable project and it did not go forward? Can you comment on that?
I've seen that happen, but I'm not sure it's an error or a mistake that a developer made. It's
Okay.
more about that what the development idea, concept is may not fit what the community sees as their vision. And oftentimes, I mean, when I think about the times that's happened, it's been very specifically around a piece of property that fits the infrastructure needs, or maybe all the pieces there that are needed for a project, but that the community doesn't see that as their future. And in the public sector, you know, they're the drivers of that. We've elected them to keep our communities safe, to keep them growing, but to keep them, the quality of place is why we've chosen to live there, right? So having all of that come together, it's never an easy conversation with a company or a developer or a real estate broker who brings us a project and it fits the physical piece of land, but it doesn't fit the development of what the community's vision is. And so when we see that, I'm oftentimes the person that gets the opportunity to sit down and have that conversation with the company or the developer. And when we do that, one thing that I always do is I bring other options to the table. It may not work for this community, but that doesn't mean the project isn't going to move forward somewhere else. And there oftentimes is within our county or within the region or within the state, there's that opportunity for that project to move forward. So we don't just say, no, it doesn't fit and it's not going to move forward here, goodbye, good luck. We're going to continue to work with that for the betterment of the state of Indiana.
Cinda, you had mentioned that, I was going to ask you, what are the needs of the towns in Hendricks County? And in our preliminary conversations, you had mentioned the need for small office space.
Right.
So do you want to comment on that?
We've seen that, and that's something, you know, the communities have charged us with, is trying to look more at office space and how do we grow that sector in our community. And we don't have the inventory to really support that. We've seen a 56% increase in the request for office space in Hendricks County. We've been out trying to foster that growth, but we're not having success, significant success anyway, with that sector. And so having those conversations with developers and other community members to have a bigger discussion, bringing in the private sector to have further conversation about what would that do for us if we invested in the infrastructure and the inventory to expand that industry.
Okay, thank you, Cinda. Mayor Fadness, City of Fishers has limited resources. I know you've got many tools to offer for a project. You have tax abatement versus TIF, and you can limit the percentage of the TIF that you would allocate to the project. How do you negotiate those points? or in your discussions with the developer as to how much of the city's resources you're going to give up to the project? Is there a set of criteria and they come up with a score and you go, that is incredibly valuable to us, and so therefore what's some of your thinking in that regard?
I wish it was that simple in terms of a scorecard. It really is not. Each deal is different. It starts obviously, especially when we're talking about real estate development, it's a pro forma that shows us a gap analysis of a reasonable return on investment for the real estate developer, and then whether that concept meets the vision for the community, and then we look to see whether or not it's an appropriate risk for our community to enter into some sort of agreement. And you know, lately this all evolves, so one of the things that we learn is, you know, these property tax appeals. So that's something that we're all having to deal with now, where significant property tax appeals are occurring, which has a significant impact on our TIF, which then causes us concern when it comes time to actually leverage for debt and things of that nature. So, you know, minimum taxpayer agreements enter into the equation. So I don't think there's a one singular item that we look at, and there's no one singular process. Each deal is looked at differently on a cost-benefit scenario.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Matt, do you want to address that? You know, how do you choose to allocate all or a portion of the city's resources to a proposed project?
Yeah, it really is a problem-solving exercise. I mean, and there's no two problems that are the same. So depending on the project, depending on the location, depending on the use, there's, there's all you refer to as a gap. But it's basically, we're trying to do this project. Do you like the project? If so, we can't do it unless we come up with a way to fill this gap. And here's why it exists. And this is why we'd like you to, explore. And that's actually a helpful discussion. So many times we have folks that walk in and say, hey, is there any TIF available? Well, yeah, it's available, but I mean, we've got a lot of other things that we can do besides just like giving you cash for vertical improvements. I mean, we can build roads, we can coordinate infrastructure improvements, there's all kinds of things that the city can, a sophisticated municipality can do to help solve problems that aren't just that. So before you get it in your mind that is the solution, I mean, you pick the brains of, hopefully you're working in a sophisticated environment with people that know what they're talking about, and they can walk through the different options that the city has or the municipality has to help solve those problems. But I think I'm saying in different words almost exactly what he just said.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
If I may kind of expand on that as well, the sophistication level of the communities vary greatly. And I've worked in multiple counties, and I've seen multiple different ways in which they'll consider how badly do we want the project and what are we going to put on the table to make it happen. One of the tools that we use, though, is that cost gap analysis and plugging in the numbers for the investment, for the jobs, the wages, what new tax revenue is going to come in. We can literally sit there with our program, either in the same room with our private and our public partners that are working on the project, and plug in different scenarios and say, okay, if we do this, then we're going to see a break-even point in this year. At what point will we see that break even? At what point will we see a return on that investment, so that we can all speak to that publicly, and as we're talking about the project in public hearings or with constituents, whatever case it may be, our public and private investors in our organization. But we can sit there and actually have that conversation and play out different scenarios, depending again on how badly a community wants that project.
Yeah, thank you, Cinda. Mayor Brainerd, I'll ask you generally the same question. How do you give them 80% of TIF, tax abatement, limited periods? How do you make those calls?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but all the comments have been made, I think apply to Carmel as well. We look at each transaction separately. There's different needs. Depends where it is, where it falls on the level of what the community wants. Is it something we really are after? Is it something that would be nice to have? We look at the particular developer. The point that came up about tax appeals, given the recession, and of course we feel those impacts several years later, the way our system works in Indiana. It has been a deal point in the more recent transactions. Of course, it depends. We always look usually in a TIF deal for the developer to guarantee at least the level of revenue as of the date of the agreement, regardless of appeals. But I think, again, every transaction, and we're subject to criticism in the public for this. Well, you did this for A, and you did this for B, but you have to recognize that every block is different. The land has different requirements. One may have parking available, another transaction may need parking spaces for it to take place, and you just have to recognize that there aren't any two quite alike.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Go ahead, Kurt.
Just real quick, in the city of Indianapolis, it's a little bit different. I mean, all of the points apply, but it depends on what you're looking at in terms of a public-private partnership. If it's a retail 4/1, or a multifamily retail development, which we've seen a lot of in our downtown area, we look more favorably upon that because of COIT and the way that the state statute's set up. And I'm not making a plug for the commuter tax, but it's just saying.
Good.
But I mean, that is different. And if you're looking at it from an economic development, jobs perspective, I mean, one of the things that we have to look at is, or at least ask the question of how many people live in Marion County, because that is a key component to this. Property taxes are not the end-all, be-all when it comes to these projects. So we do have to take into an account where people are residing. So.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. I'm going to stop the conversation here, and I'll just open it up for questions to any of our panelists. Go ahead, sir.
Well, in your community, when you have a out-of-state company coming in, like collector, what are some of the most difficult challenges you face in
I can address that.
Winter.
I agree. One of the challenges that we have in Westfield right now, we have so many active construction projects, and the dirt isn't a different color on private projects versus public projects, so it just looks like Beirut everywhere. And so it's exciting, and I think that there are some people in the real estate business, especially developers, that love the smell of napalm in the morning. They love that dirt everywhere, just dust and everything. But for a visiting company, it is really difficult for us, and I know, Jim, you've gone to great lengths to tell this story with images and pictures and videos and things for your downtown. And we're in that process, that development process with those kinds of materials, but it is hard to communicate that vision when the project's, it's not done enough for people to get it. And so we struggle with that a little bit, but it's temporary. It's being solved, but that is our biggest challenge right now.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
I work a lot with the city of Indianapolis on street projects and district projects, and you guys do a great job of keeping the inclusion of local workforce as well as minority and women and veteran business enterprises, because the city sees that P3 and KISS are wonderful ways to, well, helping the companies, the developers that are coming in, but job creation as well as economic growth for smaller local businesses. So my question is for Hendrick and for Westfield and Fishers, when you begin, and Carmel, when you begin the process of doing more P3s in this district, will you begin to look at similar language that the city of Indianapolis has to be able to include your local businesses, some of whom may be minority or women or veteran-owned businesses, as well as workforce?
If I may, I can start
ahead,
with
Sam.
that. I'm happy to start with that. So one of the initiatives that we have in Hendricks County, and we've had it for a number of years, is we have this network of local communities that we can get people connected with. And whether that be a minority business or not, and the majority of our businesses across the nation, not just Hendricks County, are smaller businesses. They're stage 1 companies with fewer than 10 employees. We've created a whole network, which then creates an environment where we can get you connected to the expertise that you need in our community, and using all the resources we have existing to do that. And you talked about workforce with that as well, and making those connections and helping run those demographics for the companies that are looking for those hires. And that, I want to go back just a little bit to your question earlier too. The number one concern issue, the hardest thing for us to sell in Hendricks County, which I would say probably across the board up here, is because of our unemployment rate, it's talent. It isn't necessarily, we can sell the ground, and we have the developers who are absolutely phenomenal at being able to do build-to-suits and meet those needs, but it's becoming more and more of a challenge for us to be able to talk about talent and attracting talent and how critical that is to our communities and finding the workforce. So working with, engaging, educating our public education and our higher education segments, we're very fortunate in Hendricks County to have a college network where we can bring in those resources and have those conversations with companies that are looking at our communities as well. And that's key that we're able to do that. Any community that's not thinking about talent attraction and the people that live there or that are commuting into your community, you're behind already. I mean, if you're not looking at that and you're not thinking quality of place and how do we attract those young professionals, it's not about this space, it's not about a baby boomer and trying to attract the Cindas to your community. It's about those young professionals and all of that for the broader spectrum, not just looking at one sector.
I'm sorry, for Carmel and for Westfield and for districts with teachers and to my question, are you looking to include that kind of language that City of Indianapolis?
It just hasn't been discussed yet. It's not out of the question. Those are probably questions for elected people. I don't know. I mean, it's not out of the question. It just hasn't been discussed yet.
Yeah, I think we're early in the game on TIFs, but I would want to do a thorough evaluation of what the increased potential cost could be. Certainly want to be there for local support at any opportunity that we can be, but we do not have currently a set policy that would require developers to use certain vendors. That would be something that I would have to evaluate very carefully to make sure we weren't looking at a significant increase in that gap that we're already trying to subsidize.
That's actually a misconception when you get a cost. So it's about utilizing your local businesses, including Carmel.
Well, we've talked about this before, and I'm not sure the Indianapolis language is exactly what we want, but of course we pay a lot of attention to utilizing our local businesses.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So at a state level, are you all concerned about anything that's going to limit how you do business tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Are you talking about state legislation or?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Anything's going to impact how you've been able to do business and how you've been able to partner with the private sector on different projects?
I think explaining to the General Assembly, and I'm looking out here at my friend Jerry Tor, but put you on the spot, Jerry, but we have a lot of folks from very rural areas in the General Assembly that have a whole different set of problems than we do in this urbanized area. And I think helping them understand why we're doing what we're doing, they hear this rumor, they hear that, they introduce a bill that's not going to help us very much. It's a constant struggle, I think, to help explain to those folks why this is good for our constituents. It's the best, TIF in particular is the best tool we have. I don't see that changing given the makeup of the state. I just think that's something that we have to deal with on an ongoing basis.
And to Mayor Brainer's point, you know, the redevelopment language that limits TIF districts specifically, there was language that was passed, I believe it was last year or 2 years ago, that limits TIF districts to a 25-year period. And what that functionally does is have an inverse effect in terms of redevelopment, because what happens is you issue a 25-year bond. Well, it takes 3 years for that project to become fully stabilized. And then within that 3-year project, you're paying that down over another 22-year period. But once you hit year about 15, you're not going to be able to issue a bond long enough, or year 20, you're not going to be able to issue a long enough bond to keep that redevelopment. So you're going to be put in a position where a council in Indianapolis case is going to have a debate about whether to extend that project or use cash out of it in order to do a project. I mean, redevelopment is not going to be going away in the near term, and there are simple things that could happen, like a TIF district could be established for 30 years, and even just something as simple as that would go a long way to helping a lot of these things. It's not a criticism. It's just to Mayor Brainer's point, it's just an education that needs to happen.
I've got one follow-up comment. Over the last several years here, including the property tax caps, which, I mean, I don't know where you stand on that, but personally, I think it was a good move. It did create some serious challenges for us. But there's been an iterative kind of approach to adding more layers of complexity to our tax increment financing legislation. And even if they're good moves, it would be nice if everything would just stop messing with it for a little while, so we can figure out how to optimize and react to it. Government, by its very nature, through the budgeting process and the way tax revenues flow, it is not a tomorrow, have an idea today and a tomorrow reaction. It takes a little bit of time and planning. And so it'd be nice if we could just have a little bit of stability for a while, and critically evaluate, changes. And frankly, it'd be nice to probably be included more, I guess, as a municipality, as being one of the key stakeholders.
But I think your point about unpredictability in the market is a good one. That every year when there's new legislation posed that could have financial consequences on the cities and towns, that has an implication on our conversations with each and every one of you as well. So to the degree that there could be a stable environment for a period of time where we could really understand the landscape, that is beneficial for both us and the developer, I think.
Okay. Connie, it's now after 8:45, and we have another panel coming up.
Say thank you to our public panel and ask for a 5-star.
Hi, my name is Scott Baldwin. I'm with Realty Quest. We're a commercial real estate brokerage firm, also a principal over at Envoy Construction Management.
Bruce Portingley, president of the Pegcore Companies. We're located in Carmel, but we do development and operate some financial institutions pretty much throughout the country, and we've been involved in obviously a lot of P3 development with the city of Carmel.
I'm Steve Van Zulen, Director of Real Estate for Eli Lilly and Company.
Carl Haas, Wallach Summers and Haas. We're a boutique law firm with a focus in public-private partnerships.
Eric Miner, Executive Vice President with Regions Bank, do a tremendous amount of municipal finance.
My name's Rick Hall. I'm a partner at Barnes & Thornburg. There's something wrong with this seating arrangement. You guys are all in these low chairs and I'm on this tall stool. People are going to think I'm tall. We had a great discussion with the panel earlier from the public perspective, and as the name of the today's topic is, it's a partnership. So from the other side, we have a great panel of accomplished people that have completed public-private partnerships from the private side. So let's start off with you, Bruce, and tell me why should a developer look at a public-private partnership?
Pegcore got involved first with Carmel in the desire to basically relocate our headquarters to Carmel. Mayor Brainerd took me for one of his well-known 3-hour tours where he describes his vision, and this was back before Palladium. In fact, I think the only thing that had been done was the bike line basically on the Monon. But he had has a great ability to describe an incredible vision. So he convinced us to basically move our business to Carmel, and we're located immediately west of the Palladium. In that regard, we did what the public panel was discussing as sort of basically a project-oriented kind of a deal. Basically, the city had done the reflection pool and was offering for cash the market value of the property. So we paid cash and started building our buildings, and I assume we would go back to our core business, which is basically doing multifamily projects throughout many of the states in the country. After we finished that, the mayor and others approached us in what I really see as the classic public-private partnership. Again, the public panel, I think, was talking about project-based things that can be analyzed one-on-one pretty much up front. So for about 6 months after we finished our office community, our office campus, the mayor and others approached us and asked us to take on City Center and some of the things we've done in the Arts and Design District and what has followed through with some land acquisitions we've done in Midtown. In that regard, I pushed them off for some 6 months because I didn't think that was really our business until I realized there was probably no one or very few developers who had done mixed use, basically in a redevelopment context that also was high density. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to work with the mayor and the city in developing the community around us. In that regard, though, I also knew this was not going to be one project. It was going to be a series of projects. And in that regard, a classic partnership, not just a P3 in the classic project-oriented basis, but an ongoing and an ongoing partnership was going to be the case. And so I described this to not only the mayor but others, that I thought in the classic way that Indianapolis and other cities preceding Carmel had done a partnership, but it needed to be expanded to recognize that this was going to take maybe decades, who knows. We've been working on it 10 years already, and I could see another 5 to 10 years and maybe forever, because this is a downtown. In fact, sometimes I have to point out to people we're not building a shopping center, we're not building an apartment community. We're working with everyone to build and to evolve basically a city center or a town. So in all that regard, it was important for us to have relations with the city. It was important for the city then to convey basically and describe, as the mayor and other leaders in the city have, to their constituents what their vision was and how this would happen. And before we undertook this major project, then it was important on us to know that the city leaders did have support from their constituents. And the mayor's continual re-election with very high margins continues to give me assurance that the feedback he is getting from his constituents is positive to make the public-private partnership work.
Thanks. Well, we've had a lot of discussion about TIF in the earlier panel in particular, and not everyone may be necessarily familiar with how TIF works, and I know, Carl, you've been helpful in structuring TIF incentives both in your work for the Carmel Redevelopment Commission and from the developer side. So would you mind sharing a little bit about how TIF works?
No, not at all. Basically, you have an area that's identified and established as an allocation area that sets a base for the taxes, and then the projects that are undertaken in that area and then assessed and taxed generate taxes that are above and beyond the base, and that excess above and beyond the base is the increment. So in a lot of ways, TIF is almost too good to be true, because you're financing based on taxes to be paid in the future, and those are generated by projects to be done in the future. That also makes them very difficult to underwrite and to finance, especially if they're standing on their own, and especially if it's a developer who's going to have the benefit of the TIF.
Maybe as a follow-up to that, can you explain how a multi-parcel or a multi-property TIF district might be helpful just beyond what's generated from the specific current project?
Sure. A lot of municipalities have established a large allocation area, or a large area that's coordinated allocation areas that support one another. Carmel has a city center, and Indianapolis has a Circle Center Mall. And because of the size of those allocation areas, the historical performance of those areas, and the projects that have been financed successfully, those allocation areas can be used by municipalities, not generally by developers, but by municipalities to finance projects.
So Eric, from your perspective, is the lender that makes these projects happen. Explain what how the incentives can make projects more feasible, and what's the appetite right now for public-private partnerships?
Actually, I think Cinda said it best. These are a puzzle. I've been doing this 25 years of municipal finance. I have never seen two deals work the same way twice. It is a very unique structure, but in the simplest sense, there are public bond issues where institutional investors buy the notes. Those are typically general obligation type debts where the city stands behind the full weight of the obligation. And then there are TIF type structures. Typically those are done in the private sector where banks would finance the gap, the increment. And the appetite, to be completely candid, real estate, everybody in here has been involved in real estate. I've been involved with real estate for about 17 years. '08 was rough for a lot of folks, right? You know, it was tough to get up in the morning. So banks try to figure out a way to find attractive assets, right? Loans are assets for banks. It was a good situation that communities were willing to step up and help developers partner together to figure out a way to get projects done, right? Because ultimately this is about the betterment of the community. It could be multifamily, could be a city center, it could be downtown mall. So from the financing institution, very attractive assets. And as time has evolved, these have become very complicated. So we did an analysis once. There's about 17 different cash flow streams that you can grab from a city, a municipality, a state, COID, EDIT, TIF, general obligations, more obligations. And it's really slices of everything. So you might have a TIF with a waterfall to an EDIT to a food and beverage tax. And so from a financing perspective, it becomes very complicated very quickly. But in the simplest sense, it's a combination real estate transaction. It's got to work, it's got to underwrite, there's got to be equity, and a joint municipal transaction where you can look to the cities, the communities for support, because candidly, it's partnership. No banker ever wants to have his name in the paper that says, hey, we financed this, and the constituency is upset about it, right?
As Eric said, and the panel earlier said, these can become complicated with a number of different bodies involved. And Mayor Fadness was kind in his description earlier. When I work with them on some of these deals, I put together a chart and say, look at how simple it is. It's a lease between the Redevelopment Commission and the Building Corporation, and they give the money to the EDC, and then that goes before the City Council, and then you have a trustee, and then so on. See how simple it is? And his response was, no matter what you do, don't show that to the public. So Scott, I know you've managed some of these complex projects and trying to bring together these different political bodies, and you want to share with the group some of the challenges associated with that?
Sure. We haven't had the opportunity to be, our projects have been more, our P3s have been more project focused instead of an ongoing relationship with the municipality to have multiple projects that attack a more broad perspective problem or opportunity. Ours have been one-off single projects, and in that regard we've kind of learned as we went. And I think one of the takeaways for us from a practical perspective has been that developers are all about the bottom line. That at the end of the day, as we talked earlier, it's all about the profitability of the project. And so we went in the first couple projects we did with kind of a spirit of negotiation with the municipality. And by the time we got done with the project, that profitability had eroded significantly as we started to work with the various ancillary bodies of the municipality to try to bring the project together. And so what we learned over time, and especially as we got the opportunity to work with Mayor Fadness, is it's very liberating to just state the profitability. As counter that is to most developers' ethos or desires. Stating a profitability just liberates you from all of that and working backwards from that profitability, because at the end of the day, as both Matt Skelton and Mayor Fadness mentioned, it needs to be transparent, and that transparency is ultimately going to be there. You're either going to read about it on the evening news or you're going to know it in your eroded profitability. So if I could mention anything that you could take away from this, it would be to go into a public-private project with the piece that you're going to be fully transparent. You're not there for a handout. There is a gap, and if you can't articulate that gap, it's probably not an opportunity for a public-private project. I heard a lot of questions about, what is the accepted methodology or scorecard, and as both Mayor Brainerd, Mayor Fadness, and Matt pointed out, there just isn't one. But generally speaking, and I have had the experience to learn that a project that has about a 30% participation from the municipality and 60% from the developer seems to be palatable and saleable from a political standpoint. And if it gets above that, it begins to look gratuitous. If it gets below that, you probably don't need their help, or you're starting to get to the point where you don't need their help. And so transparency, flexibility, everything's on the table. And we could talk for hours about the different ways these things come together, but sources, uses, the dynamics, what you put into the black box and shake out that comes out the bottom changes from the onset of the project to the culmination of the project multiple times, and that one piece is that profitability. So I would say remain flexible in your efforts to work with the municipality, remain open and transparent, and maybe in the public world it takes a long time. These things are protracted. In the private world, they're a little more speedy, but in a P3, it's somewhere in the middle. So be prepared to add a little time to what your project would normally take.
Thanks. Steve, I know with your work at Lilly, you've been involved in a number of different capacities in P3 projects. Do you want to share with us some of your experiences?
Sure. Prior to Lilly, I sat in the same chairs as the gentleman to my left. I was a private developer, residential. I worked with Matt a lot up in Westfield. And so I'd say my advice to making something a success is align yourself with a Fortune 500 company with a lot of jobs behind it. Because tell you what, a lot of people take my calls now and they used to not return them. But all seriousness, it all gets back. Everybody has said on the previous panel and on this panel that it's all about the project and knowing the project. And really it's about communicating the project, not only with the city officials that are sitting across from me now, but with the elected officials, with people like Kurt from the city of Indianapolis, so that you can sit down and talk about each project you have and how that benefits them, or find out what it is that they're really looking for. You know, maybe there's a hot button that has nothing to do with your project, but if you can somehow weave the story that your project will somehow address that need, that can really strike a chord with those folks. And we've been involved, fortunately, over the last few years with a number of really kind of interesting projects. Cityway was a very interesting situation for us. We own the land, brought in a developer, and then we started working with the city. You see Darren back there. We worked a lot with him. And then Carl was on the city side. And that was in 2008 that you referred to, Scott, 2009, 2010. It was just a nightmare from a financial standpoint. But one thing that was really interesting about that is, you know, everybody wanted to know how does this benefit Lilly, and what is Lilly putting into it? Well, we were really more of a developer. We had the land. And so that was a very different story than a lot of the other things we had done before that, which is we're bringing X number of jobs, and as Mayor Fadness said, you put that into your equation, and here's what you get. Well, we weren't really promising anything other than this helps us attract and retain talent and develops the city in an area where it needs development. So that was a very different message, and I think it was kind of confusing maybe to some of the elected officials when we sat across the table from them and we weren't telling them we were bringing thousands of scientists, but really we were just trying to keep the ones we had. So that was interesting. We had another project out in Greenfield where we built our Elanco headquarters. And that one, it was kind of a hybrid. We were retaining a bunch of jobs, adding jobs, but we were also really the developer of the site. We own that development. So we were talking with the city about, okay, we want to attract other businesses here. What will you put in the development? And so we had to compartmentalize that conversation against we're keeping, 750 jobs out here. And, you got to make sure that those messages are being heard and understood so that they don't get blurred and they start making commitments for you. And then the last project is we vacated the Ferris buildings just down the street here, and we brought Rolls-Royce into that. And we were, just like any building owner, building developer, banging on the city's door, saying, hey, we're bringing 2,000 jobs, what are you going to do for our tenant? And that was also interesting because we had to divorce ourselves from, what we had done in those buildings and the people we had. We just moved them across the street and really get everybody to focus on the attractiveness of having 2,000 people that currently work downtown going to be downtown. And that took a lot of conversation as well. So really it's about the story and really finding out what it is that people want this project to do, whether it's directly related or not. That's been my experience.
Earlier, Cinda had talked about the importance of quality of place, and this is a common theme that's been evolving in the economic development community. So outside of the, just the financial benefit of a TIF incentive or an abatement or that type of direct money to the project, for our public officials, what makes a community attractive for development from your perspective? And I'd open it up to anybody on the panel.
Well, I'll start if that's okay. Not so much from development, but from where we would locate. But where we locate really depends a lot upon development. So a key element for Cityway was that we compete with Boston, San Francisco, San Diego for talent. We can't replicate San Diego's weather, unfortunately, and we don't have a lot of the, I guess, amenities that a lot of those larger cities had. And so we needed to create a place where when we would attract people or bring people in, they would think, gosh, okay, Indianapolis may not be thought of as this first-tier city, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. And I can work here, I can live here, I can be in this community and get the same benefits without all the hassle. And so far, it's really paid off. But wherever we go, we have spaces in San Diego, places in New York, and all over the world. Wherever we go, we do look at the quality of development that's around us. And because we want our people, when they're working, to be able to enjoy the surroundings they're in and live there. And so places like Bruce has created in Carmel are fantastic. We were talking at breakfast, and I have a daughter who's a senior at IU, and she said to me the other day, if I come to Indianapolis, I probably want to live in downtown Carmel. Nobody, she wouldn't have said that, or a college graduate wouldn't have said that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But it is about creating these places that are attractive to live, but also to folks like Lily.
Maybe if I could follow up. I think Lilly is almost like a big municipality as far as needing to create things around us. The rest of us have to react to market pressures or opportunities that the public sector gives us. But let me comment on how I saw City Center and some of the things we're doing and the trade-off. We never really looked at it as the gap kind of analysis. Theoretically it's there and what have you, but in order to create a walkable community and something that our children will want to come back to, I think it also needs to, in order to be walkable, has to have the density, so you have enough people. So this does feel like a city center as opposed to a suburban development that was just moved to the downtown of Carmel or any of the other cities. And then it has to have architecture. It has to have the ability that every time you turn a corner, you're seeing something new. You see a new experience. And that's what we've tried to create basically in City Center with what now is probably 15 or 18 different building types, all in the Georgian style of architecture, because that's what Mayor Brainerd and we felt comfortable with. But the future buildings will be like that also. And again, so that there is that tie-in with the Monon, there's the tie-in with the 3 venues of the Center for the Performing Arts, there's the tie-in then with a mixed-use development of residential, restaurants, office, and retail. And that is why it also takes a long time to do it. Now, that is something that we needed the public sector to say they wanted to do it, and the electorate to tell their leaders that they wanted to continue doing it, because we then needed basically the financial contribution from the city to take care of a lot of the infrastructure, and primarily the parking. We've done 5 of the 6 different parking garages that exist in Carmel, and we've tried about every different type. If I'll just throw in, don't do the ones that are more than 1 story underground, and don't do the ones that are under a big platform like Carmel City Center is. I have a feeling that'll be the last one we ever see anywhere. So that's a nice distinction for Carmel. I would recommend the number 1 consideration, I think, is a structured above-ground garage. But then on the first floor, to make it that walkable community, it cannot look like a garage. It's got to have retail, office, residential on it. And then 1 level under a building, as we've done at the Design Center and 3 of our 5 building sites, basically at Petcore Square. But that's where we need the public sector to come in so that, basically the trade-off we have said, I've always argued, is if you'll do that on the infrastructure, I'll give you greater density and I'll give you the best architecture we can come up with. And that architecture is not cheap. We have a staff of 17 to 22 people in PEDCOR who are devoted solely to the architecture of what we do in Carmel only. Nowhere else in the country do they get involved. And they've been doing that for some 10 years and probably will be doing it for many years to come. So it takes a lot of time and money and effort and dialogue with the city to do.
Bruce is right that one of the main attractions is that if you are doing the kind of project a municipality wants, you're probably part of a larger project. It's probably much nicer architecturally, and if you have that incentive to be part of quality, that I think that's very attractive to developers, and it brings up an interesting point that the last panel covered half of it, I think, and that is that there are really two gaps. There's a gap in the project itself, where you open your books and say, here's where the level of profitability is, and here's what I need to make my project succeed. The municipality is likely to say, we're interested in helping you fill that gap, but we want nicer, we want better, we want more dense. And that creates a sort of second gap, which is how much more that's going to cost to create the kind of projects that Bruce has done in Carmel.
I think another thing to consider, if there was any part of that question was trying to elicit practicality, is that your financial incentives are, I was going to say clear, they're definitely not clear, they're very complex, but they can take the form of a master lease or a guarantee or a willingness to do something more controversial, maybe like a installment sale. But there are other things that a municipality can do, and that is be a good partner. Actually be a partner and not someone that you're negotiating with to make this occur, but someone that you're actually vested in together to see the project through to fruition. And I think that manifests itself in their willingness to help you market, to be there, to help sell the story of what's happening in the big picture, and to provide those things that make it very difficult in the spec development world to attract tenants. And to me, a municipality that is willing to do that is attractive. Additionally, a municipality that is educated about P3s is attractive, because I've been to some tertiary markets and in some larger markets where they're still getting their legs, and there's a lot of discontent about it and unwillingness to approach it out of fear for what their constituency is going to think. And so a municipality that's willing to either educate themselves or hire a professional to educate them is also attractive, in my view.
Do you have anything to add, Eric?
Yeah, my only comment, hopefully you heard what Carl said. We got a gap first time, and I'm the banker, right? I hate being the only banker on these things, but you got a gap in your short, and you want it nicer, and that creates another gap, right? So sometimes that creates value, sometimes it doesn't create value, right? Financial value, intrinsic value, matter of fact, everybody gets that. That's where the give and take comes from, and we talk about this all the time. That's the negotiation part of this, right? Is how far can you go, how far can you stretch, making it comfortable for the developer to get the return that they want while giving the city, municipality, entity what it needs or wants with respect to the project, the long-term vision. That's the art form of this. There is no science when it comes to financing these transactions. And candidly, I probably have seen more transactions fail for trying to stretch than I've seen where it kind of comes back with a longer-term vision of we're going to do this, this is how it fits within the market, here's the long-term strategy. And it was discussed earlier, but with the new limitations on 25 years, most real estate transactions are financed 20, 25 years. You're getting out on the spectrum of risk, right? So you're also looking at who's comfortable in taking the risk. Typically longer than 25 years, institutional investors. Banks like 20 years or less. So that's that art form, right? So, and you want to have a little hangover at the end if there is a hiccup with the project, that it doesn't work or cash flow as quickly as it should. So stretching all the way to the end, going to the highest dollars. I hate being bankers on these things. They're horrible. So that'd be my only comment.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on this, having sat on both sides of the table, advice to local governments that it seems pretty basic but doesn't always occur, and that is leave the local politics at the door so that when there is a voice speaking to the economic development prospect, the developer from the municipality, it's a single voice and you don't bring your local politics into the negotiating room. Those are your issues and it will only push them away and complicate things. So with that, we've got a few minutes left, and why don't we open it up for questions? Any questions? All right, well,
I'll throw in an easy
sure.
one. So for this is probably Carl and you gentlemen, what are the biggest challenges you had to deal with in a public-private partnership, specifically, I guess, in a TIF-related environment?
I can speak to that because I've had plenty of challenges. I would say that these things take a while, and we've learned as we've been going, and you'll have 1,000 meetings about this thing, phone calls, emails flying back and forth. All the while, you're dealing with not one person at the city or town, or you're dealing with several offices, in offices at the state as well. And 2 years from now, when you're all back at the table and you're ready to execute a project agreement, people don't always remember it like you remembered it. And so I would say fostering good bidirectional communications throughout the process and establishing a rigid set of meeting minutes to keep everybody on track is one thing that is, it's not necessarily speaking. The challenge was failure to communicate, and our solution was meeting minutes and trying to keep everybody on track in that regard. We've actually had politics change, appointments change, agendas change in the midst of having already, had financial risk and really gotten far down the path on trying to create a project. And so I would say timing is a challenge.
I'd say it's that developers don't inherently understand what it is that municipalities want and need, and the same is true in reverse. Municipalities don't understand that either. Rick mentioned earlier a deal structure where you would have a lease back of a parking garage. That works very well from a municipal perspective, but from a developer's perspective, that means you have to go to your lender and explain that either you're not going to own your parking or that you're going to have to mortgage some sort of subleasehold estate instead of the fee. And, Eric will tell you that going from fee to subleasehold is at least one strike.
Right, that's
not
fair.
two, against the developer's project. So, I think that the difficulty is that each side needs to be mindful of what it is that the other needs, and the developers particularly need to be careful not to ask for politically sensitive things. There's almost always a way to solve a problem. It doesn't have to be solved in any specific way. And, sometimes municipalities have set policies that they will not do something. And if to have a developer continue to bang on having to get that particular incentive is just not productive. You need to move on, find an alternative.
Yeah, there are multiple arrows in the quiver on how to get this done, and they'll all sink, at a different depth, and they don't all have to be used. And that's that flexibility I was talking about earlier. If you're unwilling to listen to different ways to get the project done, it'll be very difficult for you to get through a public-private partnership. The partnership piece, I cannot emphasize enough. It's very difficult to be adversarial in this. And so if you can't break that down from day one, you're going to have some problems. Everything from when you announce things, it all affects the entire project. You need to be lockstep with your municipal partner if you're a developer and vice versa if you're a government entity.
I think that's great advice. Any other questions?
I've got a question for Carl. We've had this discussion before. But as the developer is putting his project together, there is a recognition of the gap in the financing. You look to municipal financing, of which TIF is just one of a multitude of tools. TIF in itself is not the municipal financing. The problem that I see in many cases is that not only does the constituency not understand how the payment works from increment based dealing with this, or you're dealing with both, you're dealing with installment contracts, different types of mechanisms. So it's not just the tax base, but oftentimes it's the municipality personalities that are making decisions that need to be educated. We're not robbing real estate funds. Real estate taxes have nothing to do with it, quite frankly. Carl, you and I have had discussions, most recently in Hubbard and Craven some months ago. Could you just be helpful to all of us and explain what you and I discussed as how increment or pull it or various types of mechanisms really work so that it's easy to encapsulate in the discussion with. Most often we as developers are dealing with municipalities, not so much with the taxpayers. But that might be useful because then it trickles down from the municipality to the elected officials and the taxpayers.
I think one of the, I hope this is responsive, I think one of the keys is to, as a developer, it's always easier to ask a municipality to forego something in the future than it is to bring something out of pocket now. And that's why TIF is particularly attractive, because not only isn't it out of pocket now, but it's not, your COIT is probably in place. I mean, it will grow, so there's some amount of COIT that you're not planning on having in your pocket. But it may be that the entire increment for a project you were never planning on having anyway. So that's an easy give for a municipality, and a lot of times it's difficult to explain that. This is particularly true, I've found, outside of Indiana. Memphis, Tennessee, where I'm doing a project now, is issuing their second TIF bond. You know, when did Indianapolis issue its second TIF bond? I mean, decades ago. And one of the interesting things is that in Indiana, we are really in the forefront of this kind of redevelopment. And the farther you move out of Indiana, actually, the more difficult it gets to explain this. Manhattan doesn't need to give anyone an incentive, and Fort Lauderdale may or may not, but that's the explanation, I think, is trying to find something where the municipality will be foregoing something in the future and explaining that to the administration.
Actually, to expound on Larry's point, that's why when you see a lot of these transactions that actually work, all the parties that are involved have in some form or fashion done it before. Some form, some COIT, EDIT. You've done it for 10 years. Lily's done it in the past. You have history with it from your development days. Your banker understands it, or you're working through a financial advisor who's done it before. But to increase your chances of success, the more folks you have on your team that understand it and have done it, that will give you your best opportunity to get them done.
Great advice. We're closing in on 9:30 here. Maybe time for one more question.
This video presentation was brought to you by Barnes & Thornburg LLP, going the extra mile to help you with your complex legal needs. For more information on Barnes & Thornburg LLP, visit our website at www.btlaw.com.